Now, you said something else, Corey, about, you called yourself, like, you felt like Forrest Gump at times because, you found yourself in the right time at like the right place. I thought that was a very interesting comment. You started out in music and then you found your way into the comedy space or the film space eventually when you met Dave Chappelle. Let's just talk about, that chance encounter. Was it a chance encounter, like sticking with the Forrest Gump theme?
100%. Everything has been that. There's no part of my life that has not been a chance encounter because I legitimately was in Ohio at Kenyon College doing a concert with De La Soul, who I managed at the time, and Kweli, who I managed at the time. And so Kweli and De La had a show, and I would do that thing where, like, if a college or someone was booking De La, I would either put Mos and Kwa as an opening slot because I knew there was a budget there.
That makes sense, yeah.
Or if someone didn't have enough money to pay for De La and it was still a decent amount, I would say, hey, well, I got another group or I got another artist that you could, that you could have.
Easy peasy, yeah.
I mean, you can't plan for it because I used to stand and monitor world. Well, I still do for a lot of shows, but I usually now I'm at front of house because back then, we only travel with front of house engineers. So that's the person that sits at the front of the boards, making sure what the audience hears is good. But the person on the side of the stage has to make sure what the artist is hearing is a certain way. And we didn't travel with that guy. So my job used to be on tour for the first 3 songs after, when the artist gets on stage, we would do sound check. But the first 3 songs, Maceo from De La and I had signals to get the sound right on stage because sound guys would mix up stuff and it never snap back, or they didn't have digital boards and it wasn't always dialed in. So I would work on highs.
Most of the time shit would go wrong basically, right? And you learned you got to correct it.
So I spent a lot of time on the side of the stage. And so I'm standing on the side of the stage at that moment and Dave taps me on my shoulder and asked if he could watch the show from the side of the stage. To me, he was Achu from Robin Hood Men in Tights. That's what I knew.
Yeah.
And so at that point I was like, sure, and from that moment, he watched the show, he enjoyed the show. And then later on, I think we exchanged numbers after the show. He asked what we were doing and we decided to go to this kid's house on campus and he had like a kegger. He had a keg party. And so at this kid's keg party was De La Soul, Kweli, and Dave Chappelle. We all hung out. Dave called me like, where you at? I gave him the address and I was in the kitchen sitting on this kid's counter drinking a beer, like in a solo cup. And Dave walked in and then we all just started hanging, talking shit, having a good time. And that was the introduction of him and my crew. And then from that point, we became friends and we stayed in touch, but then we really became intertwined. Like the ball that has never been unraveled was outside of Electric Lady, where he was on his way to the Comedy Cellar and I was standing outside Electric Lady. And that day we spent a full day together. It was like him coming into the studio, meeting the Roots and Common and D'Angelo and all these kids that were at the studio that time working. Eric, I think everyone was at the studio just working on projects at Electric Lady. Mos and Quad and High Tech was there. And then, like later on that afternoon or that evening, I went with him, left our studio session. Everyone else kept recording, left our studio session, went with him around the corner, up the block, make a right, around the corner, went to the Comedy Cellar, which was like 2 or 3 blocks over. Walked in, and the first person that I saw there was Jerry Seinfeld, which he knew. And he was like, "What's up, Jerry?" And I was just like, "Yo, this is sitting to the left at a table." And it was just like, it was a awakening, of a world. And like, it was an introduction to a world that I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about comedy on that level. I've watched some comedy specials. I listened to some comedy albums, but if it wasn't Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor, I didn't know comedians like that. I knew them to be in movies, but I didn't watch stand-up like that.
When you spent that evening there with Dave, you watched him go on stage, I assume, he did his thing. Were you just sold on the comedy world and in a new way post that night?
No, I wasn't sold on the comedy world. If anything, I was confused at how these guys were making any money.
That's an honest answer. Yeah.
Because my brain is so wired to business and my brain was wired to touring and the venues and the sizes of the venues that I had my artists playing. And I looked at this spot as where he was playing in my mind. because I didn't understand it yet, but I understand it now,
Yeah.
fully. That was his studio. That's not his performance venue. It's his place where he's working out his set. I'm looking at it as this is where comedians perform, because I'm calculating how much could each person be paying. Like, it just didn't.
So could I use the analogy, Corey, like an artist or a comedian taking their material to these little places is almost like the plane getting checked while it's on the ground and it's not in the air. Like, you want to know that your routine and your set works before you're taking it to bigger stages, so you don't bomb on bigger stages. Is that it?
Yeah. They're small venues, but they're very, very, very important to the craft. The specials you see have been tried out in smaller markets and to smaller people, or even big markets and smaller audiences. It's just a thing. To answer the question, my initial response was, it was cool looking at these people go on stage, and I found a lot of the shit funny. I was just like, oh my God, like, just watching some of these people, I was just like, their ability to riff, was great. I learned a lot very quickly, and I became very much entrenched in learning who was who and what was what. But more so, I was blessed to have a friendship with someone who saw my talent, who believed in me in a way that I didn't necessarily think of myself.
So let's talk about that. When did it shift then to, you guys made it a little more official than just the friendship? You started helping him out on business stuff.
It was a phone call. Then I think we met in person. It was about, we're going to do a TV show. And, and Dave had explained to me what my role was going to be.
Basically be a producer, right?
Yeah, I was going to book all the music acts for the show and help book talent.
I heard you say that no big artist would want to come on, like, the Christina Aguilera's. Weren't you guys trying to get that at first?